Hello, my name is Eduardo Lafer. I'm from Brazil. My company is Sama Brasil Comércio Internacional. We have been active in foreign trade planning, development, and execution of operations to and from Brazil since 1991. Just in a brief, my background resides in industrial engineering from the University of São Paulo Polytechnical Institute when I graduated in 1976. And I also have a Stanford MBA title of graduation 1981. After that, working as a number of years for McKinsey and Company as a consultant, back to Brazil and forming Sama Brasil in 1991. We started off as an importation and distribution company for the first 10 years of operation in the company. And starting in the years 2000, we began to design, execute, and implement foreign trade deals to and from Brazil. And more recently, over the past 4 or 5 years, we got heavily involved in the exports of Brazilian ore, most specifically manganese ore, to destinations such as China, India, Eastern Europe, and the Middle East. So far, we have exported in excess of 120,000 metric tons of manganese ore, Brazilian origin, and this is where we stand today.
Okay, Eduardo, thank you. And I'd like to ask you, what's the main challenge today between China and Brazil regarding the mineral sector?
Thank you for the question, Pedro. Actually, we face several challenges. As we all know, China is the largest importer of manganese ore, in addition to other very important commodities. So dealing with the Chinese entails many challenges, actually. And starting from the negotiation and ending with the financial instruments to support the operations. One very important challenge that we face today is the pre-export financing, whereas we have to advance funds to bring the material to the port and also to confront port expenses, the port operators and other expenses related to the export operation. And in many cases, or in all cases, to be honest with you, pre-shipment funding is required. So in structuring the financial engineering is a very important challenge, considering some limitations that the Chinese importers face and the requirements that we have to raise pre-export financing. Our banks, for example, they required financial guarantees or bank guarantees such as a standby letter of credit, which we try to obtain from our Chinese counterparts. It's not always possible, and sometimes it becomes difficult to doing this. So we have to be creative as far as obtaining pre-export financing. No, I was going to say that in addition to the financial aspects of the operation, today we are facing increasing logistics costs, namely in the sea freight environment. Since the pandemic took place last year, we have seen a systematic raise in international freight costs, which obviously imposes a challenge. The market has not reacted or has not been reacting in such a way as to absorb the increased freight costs, which also imposes an additional challenge regarding margins and the economics of these ore export operations. And the third element that I would say has to do with the negotiation in itself, negotiating with the Chinese, the commercial terms. Sometimes, the Chinese, they use their bargain power in order to keep prices attractive to their end. But we also are confronted with increasing operating costs. So we have to reach a balance so as to offer a competitive price to the client and at the same time being able to afford sufficient margins, in order to justify and support the business and its expansion.
So since Australia and South Africa or other countries in Africa are so close to China and Brazil is so far away, how can you balance, how Brazil can be competitive in this market?
This is a very good point, Pedro. This is an excellent point. You're right. Geography has placed South Africa and Australia closer to the main destination than Brazil, which adds to the already existing challenges to be successful in promoting exports of Brazilian ore. We strive to be competitive in terms of the local costs. Sometimes we strive to do this, but we do not even reach a satisfactory position. But this is something that is a permanent challenge, and we have to keep on doing a very incisive cost management in order to be able to come to a cost position that enables us to perform and perform successfully. But it's a very big challenge, and the fact that we are further than Australia and South Africa certainly doesn't help us, but helps our South African and Australian competitors.
Okay, your company, Samo Brazil, doesn't finance the export of iron ore or manganese. How do you fix this finance problem? Do you have a fund behind you? You have a bank behind you? How can you make money to finance the operation? Sometimes it's 3-month loan from banks and from investment funds.
Well, there are a couple of means for doing this. You're right. It's a very important part of the equation to be able to solve the financial hurdles. We use a combination of elements in order to facilitate and promote the exports with the proper financing. One of them resides on having credit facilities with our banks, whereas the bank is in a position to extend pre-shipment funding, provided we are able to offer guarantees to the bank. The most commonly used and most commonly requested financial guarantee or bank guarantee is without any doubt the standby letter of credit, which is used by some markets, in some markets more, in some markets less. As we already explained in the last question, in China, we may face an additional challenge in obtaining standby LCs from our clients. If this is the case, we also have to investigate the possibility to work with trade financing institutions and organizations who might take a non-standby LC as collateral and provide the types of guarantees our banks require in order to extend pre-shipment funding. So in some cases, we're able to work with an offshore trading company, capitalized offshore trading company, who might be in a position to advance some of the funding requirements. So I would say that in a nutshell, the combination of these 3 possible elements should enable us to resolve and face the big challenge of pre-export financing.
How much the banks are charging today in Brazil for this kind of finance, monthly and annually?
Well, it really depends on the quality of the financial or the bank guarantee. Normally, local banks, they require that if you're presenting a standby letter of credit, it is being extended by, let's say, a top 50 world bank, whereas our banks may have relationships with, and also lines of credit which link the 2 banks. So the higher the quality of the issuing bank, the lower the financial charges will be at the end. I would say that on a typical basis, you may consider something like 5% on an annual basis for a credit facility or a credit line based on such a financial instrument.
Interesting. So which kind of collateral the banks in Brazil are requiring nowadays?
As I already mentioned to you, the most commonly required and most sourced out guarantee would be a standby letter of credit. In addition to a standby LC, depending on the bank, you may be able to negotiate some actual real guarantees, some real assets. Real assets being, let's say, property or inventory or other means of let's say, if you have a financing position that you may extend, you may transfer funds to your bank to guarantee part of the pre-shipment funding might also be a solution. But in most of the cases, a combination of these proposed ideas will address the bank's needs and will be sufficient for you to operate and perform.
If you have just a prime bank LC, not SBLC, just the LC, you can work with that in Brazil?
Well, if you're talking about pre-shipment financing, it will be difficult because a documentary LC entails that you have to perform in order to be able to monetize it. What does it mean, you have to perform? You have to be able to put the material on board before you're able to collect from the documentary LC. By definition, documentary LC, you present the documents and you get the funds. But to present the documents, you need to take the material inside the ship. Before that, you have to take the material to the port. And before that, you have to move the material from the mining producing areas to the port. All of these steps, they require prepayments. So for example, the miner in itself, he will be able to move the material from the mine site to the port if you provide financing, if you provide funding. It is very difficult for a miner to let you work and put their material on board without having to pay anything to them. This is one important aspect, but also you have to take into account that the logistics from the mine site to the port are also very significant, are also very relevant. And in many cases, it costs more to transport the material than the value of the material in itself. And so logistics become also let's say a hurdle. And if you want to move material, you should be able to provide payment ahead of time or a prepayment to the transportation companies. Otherwise, they won't perform. Now, remember that this is a very competitive environment, that the northern region in Brazil not only produces ore, but produces also agricultural commodities that they also have to be taken from the production sites to the port. So there is a lot of demand for inland transportation, and the supply is not that structured. So you may be faced with an increased demand with a shortage of supply, and you're going to have to deal with the pricing and costing and funding elements resulting from this equation.
When I talk to the Chinese buyers, they complain about the SBLC because they say that the Brazilian miners or the Brazilian trading companies like yours, I'm just an example, they take the SBLC and disappear with the money. And worse than that, sometimes they do everything all right, but when they arrive in the port, the Polícia Federal, the cops in Brazil apprehend the material. They take the material and they don't let the delivery or the export because the material is not certified. So you may know that in Pará, there are just 3 companies that have certified manganese or iron ore, is Vale, Buritirama, and RBM. So how do you fix this problem of certification, and how do you convince the Chinese buyer that the SBLC is okay for you and you're going to perform the operation?
This is a very good question, Pedro. This is an excellent question, and I think you're right. And I really don't blame the clients, because if you run a bad experience, like you get burned, you get hurt, and you really become extra cautious on that. But I would say that from our perspective, the best way to convince our clients is through past performance. When I say that we have performed 120,000 exports of Brazilian manganese, lumpy manganese ore, we can prove that, we can demonstrate that. We have all the documents, and our company has been in business, remember, for 30 years, and we plan to be in business for the next 30 years. So, we are serious professionals, committed to the success of our partners, joint success. our company and our clients, all of us being successful together. Nowadays, you cannot operate in isolation. You cannot work by yourself. You need partners, you need associates, and you need to work in teams in order to succeed. So our best showcase would be actually presentation of documents that give evidence of past performance, that we have been performing consistently, systematically. And in many cases, we are even being sought after by Chinese clients who identify us as real exporters and open the channels for negotiation. So we are prepared to demonstrate our credibility through real documents so that our clients may partner with us and send us the adequate instruments for proper pre-shipment funding.
Regarding the certification, what's the main problem in Brazil regarding the mining sector or the mines in Brazil, especially in Pará, the largest region producer of manganese?
Well, there are two elements to it. One is the internal element, which has to do with the mining operation in itself, that there are some regulations and requirements that must be complied with. So if you are a mining company and you really want to make sure that you comply with these requirements and you produce the internal documents, you produce the required reports to justify your mining assets to be presented to the authorities. So this is an internal problem from the mining organization. Now, once you're able to produce these documents and you're able to produce the reports, the geological reports, all the evidence which is required, then we have to deal with an external element, which are the regulatory agencies, which are the authorities in charge of issuing the proper documentation. So I've run into a situation whereas the company has been able to provide the supportive documents, quality supportive documents, but somehow the authorities or the institutions in charge of issuing the licenses took longer than expected, much longer than expected. So this can be also a problem. Today, with the incumbent federal government led by President Bolsonaro, indications are that the processes, either in Brasilia or scattered along the states, has become more nimble, more agile, and faster. But I can reassure you of one thing: our way of operation requires that we are fully, and I repeat, fully documented and institutionalized correctly. So we won't even bother to touch any material which doesn't have the proper regulatory authorization and fiscal approval. So this is something that is related to our own operation. So we're not in the business of taking unmeasured risks, but we're in the business of moving material completely, totally documented, so that we minimize any risks of a seizure, a material seizure, and complications at the port derived from the lack of proper documentation or fiscal regulations. This is how we operate, and our utmost responsibility is a full qualification of our suppliers to avoid these issues.
Okay, they told me that the Brazil mining sector sometimes is a big mess, especially in Pará. If you were a regulator or the government or a guy who has power to fix the system in Brazil, which kind of problem would you fix first?
We need more resources and more qualified people to do the documentary checking and also compare with the activities going on in the field. The two of them, they have to be correlated. This is one aspect. The second aspect has to do with once you demonstrate that the documentation is correlated to the field activities, the approvals and the speed on which the authorities provide and grant the operating concessions is compatible with the speed required by the business. So we need to have both let's say the front end, which is making sure whatever is being documented corresponds to reality, and the back end, which is once you're able to demonstrate that, you provide for the proper licensing on a timely basis. It is not good enough that you're doing whatever is required if the authorities do not give you the permits that you need in order to move material to the port and complete the export. So I will tackle both ends in order to address this so important issue.
Great. Well, China is responsible for 60% of the imports of the manganese ore and iron ore in Brazil. And at the same time, China is a liability nowadays because China is a great power that is fighting against the United States. So in terms of geopolitics, I would say, what do you think that what is going to happen from now in the future? China is so powerful and Brazil has problems with China. Bolsonaro doesn't like China. And, you know, you have several criticisms against China in Brazil as well. So how do you think that the iron ore or manganese market is going to behave in the next couple of years?
I still believe in you know, free enterprise and common sense and you know, supply and demand laws. It is a fact. You know, it is a fact that our government may sometimes, for ideological reasons. I mean, it's nothing to do with the business in itself, but maybe for ideological reasons, taking certain stances and taking certain postures. But let me give you an example. Let's look at America. Let's look at the US. In the previous administration, Mr. Trump's administration, there were some issues between the United States and China. Of course there were. And, you know, you may consider that our president, Bolsonaro, was ideologically aligned with the previous US administration. Now, we are seeing a change in the administration, and we're seeing that the new administration led by Mr. Biden, you know, in as much as there are some differences between the two great superpowers, using a lot of pragmatism and a lot of common sense. So I believe that you may have a certain government today led by a certain individual, but the relations between the states, China and Brazil, China as generating the greatest demand for the commodities Brazil produces, and Brazil being a powerhouse in iron ore, manganese, and soya, and sugar, and everything else. I mean, the two economies are pretty much complementary. So when push comes to shove, you know, talking about complementarity, talking about the trade, talking about the business relations, I'm convinced that market forces will prevail, and this government, which is today here, may not be here tomorrow. But the states, Brazil and China, will continue to exist. So I really hope that common sense and good trade practices will lead to let's say, a cleaner, more hassle-free trading environment between these two great countries, China and on the one hand, Brazil on the other hand.
Cool. So last question, what's your message for a small steel mill in the south of China that want to explore the Brazilian market?
You know, if I'm a small steel mill in the south of China, go talk to Vale's office in Shanghai or in Beijing and try to solve your issues. But if you're a larger company, if you have more resources, if you have connections here, you can establish a bridge between your needs and our supply possibilities. I think there are many good companies in Brazil which are professionally run, which might be in a good position to be as reliable sources of material and reliable partners with the Chinese serious professional importers.
Great, thank you very much.
You're very welcome.